Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes football webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune football beat writer Dave Morrison. David, Missouri freshly back from Tennessee with a 29-21 victory over the Volunteers. A lot of things happened in that game that were noteworthy. The maybe most important for Missouri was it seemed like Maty Mauk continued his late season resurgence. That maybe it was Missouri's offense kind of been the thing that had been holding him back throughout a lot of the season. But I thought he looked pretty good, maybe even more so than the statistics would have indicated in that game.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there were 3 drops early on that easily could have been. I mean, the Bud Sasser one could have been a touchdown, really, in the first quarter. That turned 15 out of 25 into 12 out of 25, and all of a sudden, you're thinking, well, he's completing 60% of his passes. He hasn't done that all year. But there was that, and then there was also the fact that the line wasn't protecting as well as it had the past couple weeks, but he still found ways to get the ball out when he needed to, and not take disastrous sacks. He got sacked 3 times, but there weren't any of those kind of like circling backwards 20-yard variety sacks. They were just kind of the 5 to 6 yard regular losses. He's looked so much more comfortable back there, it seems like, basically since the Georgia game. I mean, against Florida, he almost overcorrected. He almost was kind of like a statue back there because, the coach just told him stay in the pocket. And so he did, and he didn't use his mobility at all. But I think since then he's kind of found a happy medium between, not getting happy feet and escaping too early and, hanging in there and letting the plays develop. And his receivers have helped him out too. Those 3 drops aside, Jimmy Hunt, Bud Sasser, and Darius White have all played pretty well these last couple games. Especially, Jimmy Hunt, has had his best 2 games of his career here these last 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. By my math, since that Florida game was sort of like the low point statistically, where he was 6 of 18 with an interception and only threw for 20 yards. That was just like a bizarre box score that you just couldn't really even fathom. Since then, 51% completion, 787 yards, 7 TDs, 1 interception. So the completion percentage, not great, but the other stats are pretty good. I just think the completion percentage, I think that's going to be.
That's just how he is.
That's just going to be the way it is. I think you see guys a good completion percentage is more of a rhythm passing game where they're getting the snap, the ball's getting out there quickly, and that just never seems to be the way it works with Missouri's passing game. He's moving around back there and plays that they look to go downfield quite a bit, and sometimes it's scramble drill stuff. I do think though that what you saw of them against Tennessee, if you can complete less than 50% of your passes but make them count, which he has done during the weeks when he's been good, then that makes up for it. Because if you can throw a 77-yard touchdown pass to Jimmy Hunt, and he hit Bud Sasser for a nice touchdown pass late to those 2 big plays, that sort of makes up for some of the incremental stuff that they're not getting. So I think if you look at what they got to do against Arkansas, that's a team that hasn't given up a point in 2 weeks. So there's going to need to be a certain amount of consistency in the passing game. So I think in that sense, Missouri's got to be going into the regular season finale feeling a little bit better about its offense than it did midway through the season. Probably the star of the game really was Markus Golden, though, and the defense. The whole defensive line looked good, but Markus Golden in particular, 2 more sacks, tackles for losses, recovered a fumble, chased down a screen pass, which I thought was an incredibly impressive play where he diagnosed it, chased it down from behind. And screen passes were a thing that Missouri was struggling with mightily all last year and early this year, but they've really kind of shored up that part of their game. So when you look ahead, now they're playing a team, Arkansas, that really doesn't play offense like anything like the previous teams they've played. How do you think Missouri's defense matches up against a team like Arkansas?
Well, if it keeps playing the way it has been playing recently, it should match up pretty well. The closest thing that I could see them facing this year to Arkansas was Georgia, and they were, all told, they were fairly good against Georgia. I know that sounds kind of crazy because they gave up 34 points and all that, but they were on the field for 45 minutes. The cards were kind of stacked against them in that game. But I think Arkansas tries to do a lot of the same thing Georgia does. They, run downhill. They line up under center. They kind of, use 2 tight ends at a time, get a lot of kind of beef on the line, things like that, and then they run play action passes off of that and do it that way. Brandon Allen, his status, Arkansas's starting quarterback, his status could dictate a lot of what they do this week because, he is kind of the Hudson Mason of that offense. He's the one that gives them that play action threat when they want to use that off of their run game. And, if he can't go, then his younger brother Austin really doesn't have that much experience running this offense. So that could put a crimp into their plans. But I think, this is a team that Missouri is going to have to keep maintaining its gap integrity and doing all the, making tackles and doing all those things that Dave Steckel always talks about, as kind of the simple keys of winning, because Arkansas has a huge offensive line. It has an offensive line that, kind of like Auburn's last year, runs a lot of different blocking schemes and a bunch of different formations that try to get people's eyes in the wrong place and things like that. And, if Missouri's not careful and it's not disciplined, they could end up giving up 500 and something rushing yards like they did against Auburn last year. So, I think if they're playing as they have been the last month or so, they'll match up well. If they start falling back on some of those bad habits from, say, Toledo or Indiana, or even, at times when they got worn down against Georgia, Arkansas could go a long way towards kind of dictating this game.
Yeah, I think really due to the study you looked at, I don't think they got out of their nickel defense the whole time against Tennessee. There's really been any more in college football. You spend most of your time in the nickel defense. I think this week you would see more of the, I guess you call it the base defense, although it's not really your base defense if you never play it. But you're going to get another linebacker on the field probably a fair amount of the time and remove the nickel back. So that'll be a little bit different for Missouri. We haven't seen much of Donovan Newsome for quite a while. I can't remember last time I really heard his name. So he might be on the field a little bit more. I think last year I would have said definitely. I'm not so sure anymore that Missouri really is better suited to playing defense against these kind of teams than they are against spread teams. But they've been pretty good against spread teams this year. It's the whole key, obviously, this is not rocket science, but if you can put them in second and long or third and long and make Arkansas pass the ball, then you're in great shape. Because that plays into Missouri's hands, obviously, as pass rushers, and just that Arkansas is not a super sophisticated passing team. They want to use play action. So if you can put them in obvious passing situations, regardless who their quarterback is, advantage Missouri there. But Arkansas is not a team that's going to really abandon the run.
And the last team that Missouri played a bunch of 4-3 against was Vanderbilt, and they fared pretty well against Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt's also not as proficient offensively as Arkansas is. But I think the thing that you can kind of look at as a possible problem point in this game was, Vanderbilt ran all over the field with their tight ends against Missouri. I think their tight ends caught 11 passes for 100 and something yards and a couple touchdowns. Well, Arkansas is one of the best tight ends in the league in Hunter Henry, and they use him a lot. So, I mean, if Donovan Newsome's not on, or if the safeties are, too worried about the run, I mean, that could lead to a big game from the tight end. So I think, a little bit of Georgia, a little bit of Vanderbilt, maybe a little bit of Auburn's trickery from last year, throw it all into a pot, and you've got it. And also add Brett Bielema's affinity for putting 9 offensive linemen on the field at a time, maybe, and you've got Arkansas.
Arkansas, it's just an interesting team because they're 6-5, but if you look at the both teams, Missouri and Arkansas, have given up the exact same number of points. I think they both give up 20.2 points a game. Arkansas has scored 4 points more per game than Missouri, yet Arkansas is 6-5 and Missouri is 9-2. So it speaks somewhat to the level of competition the two teams have played. Arkansas has played almost nothing but ranked teams, whereas Missouri has played only one, which leads us into our final point of the game with another fine segue. Getting good at this. The respect angle. We've heard a lot in the last few weeks as Missouri has started to pile up some of these wins. Are people giving Missouri enough respect from the outside? And I guess maybe the one thing you could do to make this less of a subjective argument than an objective argument is they've been the underdog in 6 SEC games out of, let's see, they played 7. They've been the underdog in 6 of them. No, wait, that's incorrect. 5 of them. They've been only the favorite against Vanderbilt and Kentucky, and yet they are 6-1. So obviously they're doing a little better than the odds makers would indicate. Do you feel like maybe people have been a little slow to get on the Missouri bandwagon, or do you think they deserve more love than they've gotten?
I do, but then also kind of looking back at the 5 games that they were underdogs in, I mean, I could really only see one that I could really take issue with. That's Tennessee. I never understood why one, they were favored, Tennessee was favored to begin with, and 2, the line just kept rising. I never really got that.
As Tennessee kept losing key players, the line kept rising.
But I mean, if you look at the other games they were underdogs in, I mean, South Carolina on the road, when everybody thought South Carolina was good, makes sense. Florida on the road, or Georgia at home, And that definitely made sense because Georgia, kicked the crud out of them. Florida on the road the week after the Georgia game also makes sense. And then Texas A&M on the road the week after A&M had just beaten Auburn, on the road itself. That makes sense. So, I mean, it seems as if,
Does it make sense that Arkansas is a slight favorite over Missouri?
No, I don't think so. It doesn't make sense, but then again, I can understand it. I don't know if that makes if I'm making sense now. But I mean, the thing is, Arkansas is basically the hottest team in the league right now. I mean, you can say Missouri is. They won 5 in a row. They've done it against not very good teams. Arkansas stuck in there with Mississippi State till the end. They shut out LSU, which is a ranked team, and they shut out Ole Miss, which a month ago everybody was saying this is a national title contender. They made them look like fools last week. And then even if you look like head-to-head, Missouri gets beat by 34 by Georgia. Arkansas gets beat by 13 by Georgia. I mean, so...
Although it was way out of hand and it was kind of a late comeback.
Yeah, well, Missouri's was out of hand the
whole
whole game.
There was no late.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I can understand why Arkansas is favored. I still think it's kind of surprising, being that Missouri is on a 5-game win streak and they are at home and things like that. But I can kind of understand that. I mean, back to the original question, though, is this team getting enough respect? I mean, I don't think anybody should care if they're getting enough respect. Like, if Missouri keeps winning, why does it matter how much respect they're getting and things like that? I mean, there's always the specter of the Indiana loss hanging over there. 2 months ago, they lost to a terrible team, and that's basically why they're not in the top 10 right now. And so I think that's kind of keeping people from a national perspective from totally buying into this team.
That loss gets brought up a lot.
Yeah,
almost any discussion of Missouri, it will be brought up. Yeah.
And then there's also the fact that who have they beaten? I mean, really,
right.
I think we mentioned this before, but if they get to the SEC championship game and they win, that will be basically their only win over a ranked team this year. So, I mean, I don't know if that means they're getting too little respect or if people are adopting them too slow. What I do think is Missouri shouldn't care if they're getting enough respect. I mean, if they keep winning, they'll earn that respect.
Right. And if anything, it's actually I think the coaches are delighted that this keeps happening, because then it's less work for them to try to create this us against the world mentality, which every coach wants to create anyway. So I think it's handy for them. As far as, odds makers set the lines, and then what happens to the lines after that throughout the week is an indication of how many people are betting on which team. So the odds makers, it's not like there's 4 guys in Las Vegas plotting against Missouri. They set the line, and then if a bunch of people want to start betting on Missouri, then the line goes down, and Missouri eventually becomes the favorite. So across the nation, I think people tend to be a little more enamored with offense than defense, and so if you're a team that tends to win ugly or with defense, people keep thinking the next loss is right around the corner. I would agree that Missouri has no real, maybe it's hard to say. You can say they don't have a quality win, but I look back at all these road wins. Road wins are kind of quality wins that beforehand it always seems like it's made to be a daunting task and the other team is favored, and then after it's over, then it becomes, well, how good was South Carolina or Texas A&M? Or, it seems like the goalposts get moved a little bit on how difficult it is to win a road game. So I think, they're not top 25 wins, but I think when you go and win 4 road games that you're underdogs in, those are quality wins in my mind anyway. But the fact of the matter is they haven't played all those good teams. So when you're sitting there looking at the schedule and you're trying to differentiate between 2 lost teams who deserves to be ranked higher, then it's fair to put Missouri lower on the list, just because, hey, if you don't like it, then schedule a tougher non-conference schedule.
And go back in time and don't lose.
Or go back in time and don't lose by 34 points to Georgia, or don't lose to Indiana. That's really the one that they've worn around. That's like their concrete slippers. People do not forget when you lose at home to Indiana. I think that's been the lesson of this season. But as we said before, it really makes no difference. They're not a team that was going to make the college football playoff regardless. It's not like the respect of people on the committee or anything really even matters.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, join us again next week when we will discuss the end of the regular season and perhaps look ahead to a trip to Atlanta, or perhaps ponder Missouri's bowl fate.